Good morning. It's great to be back. This is the second time I've had a chance to come and speak at this wonderful, wonderful way to start a day. To be able to have this level of reflection and time and beautiful music among friends in a great university. So it's great to be back. Thank you, Phil, for inviting me. When Phil asked me to do this, thinking about change making, I kept thinking about, well, what are the aspects of a change maker? What are the things that I've learned along the way in terms of my own path? And when I started thinking about it, I started thinking about the teachable moments, those moments where I've had an opportunity to meet and connect with people in ways that are often unexpected. And Phil, you had mentioned, a number of people coming back now from studying abroad, and Elon put such an emphasis on going and serving and connecting in different parts of the world that I thought I would reflect a little bit upon some of my own travels and some of the teachable moments that have come along with it that have continued to inform my own path as a change maker, at least an aspirational change maker. And I thought it would be good for us to just start with a quote. This is something we pulled from our book, but this is by Polly Behrens, which basically, it says, "Everything that happens to you is your teacher. The secret is to sit at the feet of your own life and be taught by it." And I love that idea in the fact that every day, every moment is a teachable moment, if you allow it to be. And I thought I'd try to capture a few different themes that I've seen among some of the most inspired and inspirational change makers out there in the world. And I've come up with a few different words that I thought convey that for me. One is generosity. So the word generosity and what that means for me. And I've seen it in many different shapes and forms, but I was reminded of an adventure that I was on that my parents definitely did not condone. When I was between my sophomore and junior year, I ended up selling a painting, which afforded me to get a round-trip ticket to New Zealand and $300 in my pocket. And I spent $250 of those $300 learning how to surf in Hawaii. So I arrived in New Zealand with $50 in my pocket and 4 months of travel ahead of me. And I put on my backpack filled with books. I brought very few clothes and lots of books, all these books that I had aspired to read. And in my sort of virtuous way, I left the city of Auckland on foot, and I walked down the on-ramp of a highway and stuck my thumb out. And I ended up spending most of that day hitchhiking my way down, but I didn't make it very far. I was still about 400 miles away from my aspired destination. And it was raining, and I was on the side of this road for about an hour and a half. And I was on this perpendicular place where I was on a major highway, and then I was on a side road, and I hadn't seen any cars come up the side road. And all of a sudden, here comes this old jalopy sort of tilting to the side, and it's raining, and I stick my thumb out hoping that something's going to happen, and sure enough, he pulls over. And I sort of barely look in, and I say, he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to Wellington." He said, "Hop in, that's where I'm going." And we were 4 hours away from that. So I threw my backpack in, jumped in, and I felt something bang my leg. And I looked down, and it was a leg. It was this guy's prosthesis leg. So I looked down at the leg, and I looked over at the place where his leg was supposed to be, and there was no leg. And then I looked up this body, and here's this guy covered in tattoos, clearly just gotten in a fight, his nose cockeyed into another direction. And at first I thought, this is not good. But it turned out his name was Griff, and he had been released from prison just about a month earlier, and was one of the most generous people I had ever met. Generous in his spirit, generous in his time, generous in his beliefs and feelings, and we had one of the most remarkable 4-hour drives wandering our way through the countryside of New Zealand, and we got there quite late, about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. A lot of different hostels were closed, and he spent an hour trying to find a place where I could sleep that night. So generosity, sometimes it comes in very unexpected ways, even from a side road. The idea of courage is another thing that I've seen in change makers. A year later, I had a chance to spend almost a year in South Africa, and it was in the early 90s, and I was there studying politics, and it was a fascinating time to be in the country, of course, because Mandela had been released from prison in '89, but it was still sort of the apartheid transition movement. And some of the courage that I saw and experienced while I was there was pretty remarkable, including somebody who I became close friends with who had spent 10 years on death row. And he'd been there because he was part of a nonviolent terrorist act and had gotten caught for it and had spent 10 years on death row. And here he was in my classroom, studying with me, thinking about and acting upon the future of his country. And the courage that that seems to take, and then I've had a chance to spend a little bit of time with Nelson Mandela himself, but the courage that you see in that kind of environment where you are persecuted that way and that you feel that you have so much owed to you, and yet you step beyond that and believe that you have the ability to go and make a difference, takes a lot of courage. And for me, it was very inspirational. Faith. When I graduated from business school several years later, I once again put on my traveling backpack, this time a little book bag with a pair of shorts and a pair of pants, and spent 2 months traveling through Southeast Asia. And during my travels, I had a chance to go spend some time in Laos. And I went to a little tiny village called Luang Prabang, which is in the very northern part of Laos. And what it's known for, it's known as a Buddhist retreat. In fact, it's got lots of different monasteries that are there. And once again, I had no money. But one of the things that you do is that to really experience and be part of that community and culture, there are alms every morning, 6 a.m. And the last day I was there, I decided to take all of my remaining money and go buy a bunch of food for the alms. And I had no idea how I was going to get back. Once again, something that my parents wouldn't condone, or would condone. But I decided, I'm just going to do this because it feels like the right thing to do. So I take all my money and I spend it all on these alms. And I had one of the most sort of deep spiritual connections at that moment in time, 6 o'clock in the morning, giving everything I had to be part of this experience. And I'm wandering back in this state of bliss back to my hostel, and I pick up, remember I had a pair of pants and I had a pair of shorts, and I was wearing my pair of pants. And I knew every item of clothing because I had about 5. And I then changed from my pair of pants into my pair of shorts, and I reached in and I found this roll of money in my pocket. And I have no idea how that roll of money was there. It wasn't there, I know, the night before because I had taken everything I had and given it, and I knew because I was worried about the actual act of giving it. But I thought that this karmic retribution, this karmic connection that had come back and had provided this sort of deep sense of faith that if you follow your heart and you do the thing that feels right to you, that things will ultimately come around and give you a new lift and new lease is something that's been great. When I was thinking about my own path, my own journey, I was doing a lot of speaking to different student groups, and I had the great fortune of being able to go speak to a professor's class who is one of the giants in the leadership field, somebody named Warren Bennis, who teaches at the University of Southern California. And Warren has become a close friend, and he pulled me aside after one of the talks I'd given to his class and said, you should really write a book about that. And it scared me to no end. So I quickly dismissed that idea and went on to my own journey. And I came back to speak to his class a year later, and he said, what about that book? And he really provided what is another, I think, key ingredient to what changemakers are and how we can inspire next changemakers, which is idea is persistent encouragement. This concept that we have to be able to encourage and inspire others, but do it in a persistent way. Sometimes it may not take the first time. And I tell you that taking the time, even though it really scared me to write a book, because it can be a pretty isolating experience, that having somebody like Warren Bennis encouraging me along the way and holding me accountable and being persistent was really important for me. And then finally, this idea of where your happiness comes from. Where does your happiness reside? Shortly after our daughter was born, my dad pulled me aside and said, Christopher, you're about to embark upon a really important chapter of your life, and you're going to want to give everything to your kids, which I get, because I want to give everything to my kids, and that's where my heart is. But he said, don't forget that the best thing you can give to your kids is to be happy yourself. That if you are happy yourself and you can demonstrate and reflect your own happiness, your own passion, your own inspiration, your own path, and be strong for yourself, that's what your children are going to be inspired by. That's where they're going to find their happiness. Don't find your happiness in them. Find your happiness in yourself. It makes me think a little bit of another quote from our book, which is this idea that Howard Thurman shares with us. And he says, don't worry about what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs are people who come alive. Right? So as I think about our children, and I think about you, and I think about where we can go, I think about some of these themes, right? How can we be able to share with others generosity? How can we demonstrate courage? How can we have a deep-seated faith in humanity and each other and our own paths and our own lives? How do we provide this sense of persistent encouragement to one another to follow that path and deeply believe that you need to find your own happiness. You need to find that place where you have come alive. And if we can do that, then I think we can bring great change to the world. Thanks very much.